Welcome everybody. Welcome to this Sharing Jesus workshop. I'll just let a few more people in, and as you're joining us, if you want to type into the chat box where you're from, that'd be great, just so we've got a sense of where people are joining us from, and we'll begin in just a few moments. So good to see you with us. Oh yeah, Folkestone and London. So brilliant. Oh, a couple more people coming in, that's great. So just make sure we've got everybody here. Brilliant. So just wait, yes, I'm just asking people as they come in to type where they're from in the chat box. It's great, you can see some of those. And so this workshop put on by Fresh Expressions is helping to introduce to you and engage with the Sharing Jesus resource at sharingjesus.life. I don't know if you've been to the website yet, or whether you're hoping to gain an introduction to the resource today. And hopefully, if you have looked at it, we'll be able to answer some of your questions that you have about it. If you haven't looked at it yet, we're going to introduce it to you in just a moment, and go from there. Mike, can I ask you to introduce yourself and just say hi to those who are gathered? And you're the mind behind Sharing Jesus, so perhaps just a brief background to it would be great.
So thanks, Simon, and thank you all for joining us for this little webinar. I've been involved with Fresh Expressions of Church. I'm an Anglican minister. I led a church down in Taunton in the early 90s, where we did things that were beginning to look like Fresh Expressions. And I've been involved with new types of church, new Christian communities for the last 20 years or so, being an advocate for them, coaching people involved, writing about it and researching it, doing consultancy work and so on. So this has been very much my life for 2 decades or more.
Great. And these this resource and other resources that we'll sort of briefly tell you about later have come out of that experience and observations, and just seeing the new thing that God's been doing over these last 2 decades through the Fresh Expressions movement. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Simon Goddard. I'm based in March in North Cambridgeshire, and we've moved here relatively recently, but already getting involved in some new communities here in March, and was involved previously in another part of Cambridgeshire, planting a Fresh Expression of Church in a rural context. So what we're going to do, we're going to start off by, so the website sharingjesus.life has these 7 distinct units, and what we've done is taken the animation that begins each of those units and put them into one long video. So there's 7 videos. Each of them are about a minute and a half long, and so we've got a 10-minute video that we're going to show you now, which basically just takes each of the animations from those units, and it may be a lot of information, but you can always go back and watch the animations on the website at your own convenience. And then we'll talk a bit more about that and tell you what else is on the website, as well as these animations. But I think everybody's in now, so I'm going to play the video for you, just making sure I'm ticking the right boxes. Let me just do this. Do unmute and shout at me if you can't hear the video. Hopefully I've ticked the right boxes to make sure that you can. And so we'll watch this, and then 10 minutes time we'll come back and talk a bit more about it.
Maybe you're involved in an outreach project with people who don't go to church, a bereavement support group, for example, or a group that meets for lunch. It's dead easy to add a spiritual dimension and introduce them to a fuller life. All are made to feel welcome whether they choose to take part in this or not, so here's an example of what you can do. Invite those who wish to stay on after the meeting. Gather round 1 or 2 tables. Light some candles. Play some Christian music. Read a story from the Bible or an extract from a collection of Christian spiritual writings. Allow time for silent prayer or reflection. read a couple of prayers, or make up your own. Just 15 minutes max. You could do something like this with almost any outreach initiative. A craft group, a lunch for people who are homeless, a youth group, a community cafe, and more. So why not enhance what you already offer? Why not give people a chance to explore a richer life? No one is compelled to join in, but for those who do, they'll be nourished in their spiritual growth.
Want to share the Christian faith but talking about Jesus would be a step too far? Try Conversations with a Difference. Choose a topic that interests the group, a news item, a celebrity, well-being, a soap opera, your pets, sport, a music genre, anything the group would like to discuss. Talk about it for a while. Then ask the question that turns it into a different kind of conversation. If God exists, what would God think? Or if you prefer, imagine a great spiritual teacher dropped in. What would they say? Imagine a walking group. When you stop for a drink or a meal, start a conversation with a difference. Invite someone to suggest a topic. After a while, ask the question that makes the conversation different. If God exists, or if a great spiritual teacher dropped in, what would they say? You could do this with young people, at your messy church activity table, with your neighbours, with any group. Want this to feel natural? See the written resource for ideas. People would become more confident in talking about spirituality. They would connect spirituality to life, and they would have fun.
Looking for an easy way to share the Christian faith? Invite people to a spirituality group. You might explain, Jesus is known as one of the world's greatest spiritual teachers. Let's look at some of the stories about him and see what we think. For each story, use Bible Talk. Ask 4 questions. If this story happened today, what would it look like? What is it saying to me? Could it make a difference to my life? If so, how? Did it make a difference? If so, how? You could look at the first 3 questions in one session, or you could do them over 3 sessions to keep each session short. Then do an experiment. See if the story does make a difference to people's lives. The key word is experiment. Some experiments bear fruit, others don't. That's life. So don't let people worry about whether the experiment works or not. In the next session, share your experiences. Christians involved can relax, because the Bible does the evangelism. All they have to do is join in. No embarrassment, just authentic conversation. Anyone can take part.
Worried that when using Bible Talk, people will ask you a question and you won't know the answer? Or that they'll think your answer is stupid? Solution: there's no need to answer their questions. If they ask a factual question like, who was John the Baptist? Invite them to Google the answer. If it's a question of opinion, like, what about all the suffering in the world? Ask, from what you know about Jesus so far, what do you think he would say? And join in the discussion yourself. Don't worry about people getting the wrong answer, and don't think you need to correct what they say. You may end up discouraging them. If our place in heaven depended on right answers, none of us would get there. We are saved by grace, not by right answers. Just affirm whatever you can in their response. Overlook what you disagree with, and focus on what's most important, connecting them with Jesus. So don't worry about controversial questions. Simply reply, from what you know about Jesus so far, what do you think he would say? you'll be promoting the best spiritual habit of all, relating life to Christ.
When you explore the Christian faith with inquirers who don't go to church, some people are bound to disagree with you and with each other. Don't worry. Disagreement is part of the Christian life. Indeed, the church's 2,000 years of argument. Here's what you might do. Imagine someone in the group says something provocative. Suggest people prayerfully or thoughtfully consider their responses and then share what comes to them. Make it easy to remain silent if someone prefers to listen. Encourage people not to correct, but listen to each other. Remind them that the church is full of different views, and this variety can offer a broader glimpse of God. Suggest that after people have shared their reactions, the group has another brief silence. Then take it in turns for people, if they wish, to say where they have seen godly love in others' responses. Someone's smile, an encouraging expression on a person's face, someone leaning forward to listen, what someone else said. Then let the discussion move on. People will have spoken honestly, everyone will have been heard, no one will have been judged, World War III won't have broken out, and you'll have shown a Christian way to handle disagreement. In the middle of conflict, people will have listened to God.
What might you do after you've introduced people to Jesus? Say you have used Bible talk as described in Discovering. How might you help inquirers go deeper? Here's a possibility. Before the group meets, point one or two people to content you've prayerfully considered, such as a blog, podcast or video that explains the Bible story, gives some background information or suggests how the story applies today. The investigators share what they've learnt before the discussion starts. The group is now accessing wisdom from the church at large. Members rely on the Spirit to work through the Bible, the group as it discusses the Bible passage, experience as people describe their experiences of applying the story, and the wider body as members of the group access Christian resources on the web. One more thing, don't forget to pass around the leadership. When people help to lead, it becomes their group. Sharing leadership generates commitment. Even young children can lead a Bible discussion. An example of this and other great ideas are found elsewhere in this Sharing Jesus resource.
How do you turn an inquirers group into a worshipping community? Well, if you use Bible talk or something similar, you're halfway there. At the beginning or the end of the discussion, why not light a candle? Perhaps play appropriate music or allow 2 or 3 minutes of silent headspace. Encourage people to think positive thoughts for a loved one or a situation in the news, or to reflect on one thing from the Bible discussion. Then invite them to address their thoughts to God as they currently understand the divine. Or else suggest people write a prayer or bring one and read it out. Look for creative gifts and passions within the group. Might someone bring an object to spark a prayer? Might others offer a poem they've selected or written? Might some of the group take photographs to illustrate a theme? Might some be inspired to write tweets or emails as a way of turning their prayers into action? Why not encourage takeaways, asking people to write a social media post or draw a picture expressing what they think God was saying during the gathering? Bit by bit, Bible discussion would expand into richer worship.
Great. So there you have all 7 of the Sharing Jesus animations, and welcome. There was a few people that joined us quite early on in that, so hopefully you didn't miss too much of those videos. But introducing the Sharing Jesus resource, and Mike, it'd be good just to talk a little bit about the resource, because this is in some ways different to other evangelism resources, because I think one of its uniquenesses is about a group and a community sharing Jesus in that context rather than on a one-to-one. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that's right, really. There are lots of one-to-one evangelism resources, and some of them are great. But what we were aware of was that there weren't many resources for people who are working in groups. So this is particularly for people who are wanting to start new Christian communities, missional communities, micro churches, whatever you want to call them, fresh expressions of church. For people who want to do that, and you've followed the loving first cycle, you've listened to the context, you found a simple way to love the people around you. I call that organized love. It becomes a sort of watering hole around which people gather, and then community forms. And as all this is happening, you're thinking, well, how are we going to share Jesus, which is the next little stage of the journey, if you like. And after you share Jesus, of course, then we hope that something like a worshiping community, a congregation connected to the wider church will emerge. So how do you actually share Jesus in that context? And that was the purpose of this resource, was to give people some ideas for what they might do in the context of this group type approach to mission. And so each resource, each unit in the resource, it contains the animation that you've seen, and then there's a written guide which amplifies the animation and actually has lots of more ideas. And I'd really encourage you to look at the written guide. For example, in the third topic that we looked at, discovering, the animation talks about this Bible talk with these 4 questions. But what I found when talking to people is they've looked at that, but they haven't realized that if they read the guide, there are about 4 other different ways of doing exploratory Bible study with people who are wanting to find out more about Jesus. And these ways are very different. You can do the sort of godly talk way. You know, I wonder what was in Jesus's mind when he said that. I wonder what the weather was like. I wonder how the crowd reacted. I wonder what the disciples thought about it. And you might be with a group of people for whom that's much more appropriate than the 4 questions that were suggested. So I'd really encourage you to read the written guides for the topics that interest you. You can go through these topics, obviously, in any order. And then there's a third element, which is a little video, which someone who's actually used one of these approaches talks about their experience of doing that.
That's great, Mike. Thank you. So we want to make this open to you based on what you've seen just then in the animations, or perhaps if you've already accessed the website and looked at the resource, the downloadable guides that Mike's just talked about. Are there any questions that have come up for you in that? So do feel free to type a question if you've got one. And Christine's got a question. I think we're a small enough group for you to ask that. So if you want to unmute, Christine.
Sorry, I was just trying to work out how to do that. Yeah, I realised that I actually have done this now, the Bible Talk side of things, because I looked at this when you first sent all the information out, and I thought it was really good. But what I didn't know was I had a few people who were interested, but I didn't know what readings to look at. And but then I think I got in touch with someone and discovered it was from the book of Mark, whatever stories you wanted to look at from the book of Mark. So that's what we did. But I found some of the stories work better with the questions than others. It was just a bit of feedback, but it might have, just from point of view of people who are maybe looking to do it, to maybe just put up on the thing somewhere that the stories were from the book of Mark, just to give people a pointer where to start.
Thanks,
Christine, that's really helpful, and you're absolutely right. If you went through the Gospel of Mark, you'd find that there's some sort of narrative passages that probably didn't work so well for these questions. So I do think you can choose any of the Gospel stories for these questions. You could choose any Bible story, actually, but you just have to choose one that works best for the group, the story. And in some contexts, the Bible study might be quite short. You might be having a meal, and you might be having lots of conversations. You might be doing a bit of planning and thinking. You'd be like doing a bit of praying, and you might only have sort of 15 minutes for the Bible discussion. And so you can just take one question at a time and go through it over 4 weeks, one question at a time over 4 weeks, which means you only have to think of a new story once every month. So this becomes really easy for the leaders. My great motto in life is make it as simple as you can, and keep it simple, stupid. So I was saying someone has just flagged up that they got cut off for some reason. What I was saying is that you can choose any of the Bible story. You can choose any of the gospel stories. It's great just to choose a story that best fits the group. But you can actually take 4 weeks over these stories if you've got a short space of time. If you've only got 15 minutes for a Bible study, you might just do one question at a time. And then you only have to think of a story once every 4 weeks, which is amazing. So, Christine, really interested in the fact that you've had some experience of doing this. And I'm just wondering whether there's anyone else in the group who's had some sort of experience of trying out any of this material. Maybe if you have, you could just type it into the chat room.
Yeah, looks like a couple of people might be typing, but even if you haven't, if you've got questions, then we can look at those. Oh. Looks like Judith's typing. We're all waiting in anticipation for what Judith might say.
I wonder, sorry, I
Contest.
haven't really looked at the resource online before today, but I've got a table talk here, like a set of that. Have you thought of doing something like that with that Bible talk? So they're printed cards, so that you could even give them out to people. You talked in one of the videos, it talked about sharing leadership, but could you, I know you could do that as a leader. You could say, here's a question to ask, but I mean, I wondered if there was some way of doing that might be quite interesting for people.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Whether you could put the questions on a card, and you could, if you were doing all, the first 3 questions in one study before they go away and do the experiment, as it were, you could give out, I suppose, one question on one card to 3 different people and say to them, will you lead the discussion on that question? And I can imagine that would work really well. And just say, just ask the question and then encourage people to talk, keep to time, keep to task. We'll have 10 minutes on each question. So just watch the clock, make sure one person doesn't monopolize the discussion, that sort of thing. I think that'd be a great way of sharing the leadership.
Great. Judith did comment, we use this approach as a follow-up from a 9-fold path learning lab. Some of us felt it was too much of a Bible study, so we have moved to a different approach. So I don't know if you've got a response to that, Mike.
Well, yes, I'd love to know what approach you're now using, Judith.
Okay, so we started the Ninefold Path during lockdown, and then we carried on.
Can you just interrupt and ask you to tell us what the Ninefold Path is?
Oh yeah, it's called a learning lab. It's based on the Beatitudes, and it's material from Mark Scandrette and the Nine Beats Collective. So it starts from the question, really, how can we live well, and what does Jesus say about that? And every session there is an experiment. Okay, if we're thinking about blessed are the poor, what can we do to see what that looks like in our lives? So it's very much that experimental approach. And we have a very small group, but a very wide range of beliefs. So someone who I think would say, I have definitely become a Christian going through this, but I'm still taking baby steps. Someone who says, I don't believe in God, and I don't think I will. And someone else who clearly has difficult experiences of church from background and is finding Bible study hard. So what we're doing now is taking turns to lead, and each person is bringing something that means a lot to them, and we're discussing it. But the basic question is, how do we live well, and what does Jesus say about that? What can we do about it?
That's great, Judith, and I love that approach, which is actually what very similar to one of the approaches we suggest in the worship approach. Just let people bring in something that matters to them, and then talk about it and share. And I think it's a great approach, and I love it. Just tell us, so for all our learning together, you said you used one of the approaches. Was it in sharing Jesus? Was it the Bible talk?
It was the Bible talk, yes. Yes. So I will have a look at the other options, because they sound interesting.
Tell me what happened with the Bible talk. What did you find?
I think we didn't go through Mark's gospel. We tended to pick different stories depending on what seemed relevant at the time. I think people found the idea of experiments challenging, even though we'd done a lot of it in the Ninefold Path. And I think there was just a sense that this is too much like a sort of traditional Bible study, and that's not what that particular group wanted. And not that the questions were difficult or anything, but I suppose those of us leading are very, very experienced in Christian leadership, and so it was very easy to just fall back into, well, this means that, and that wasn't really very helpful. So we had to rethink.
So I think that's great, Judith. That's really, really helpful. I've had conversations with one or two other people who've said, the experiment question feels quite a big hurdle for people. And I'm not saying this is the answer for everyone, but I've been encouraging one or two people just to say, look, when you give some examples of very simple experiments, like, might this stay in your thoughts through the week? So you just think about it during the week. Might it change your attitude to someone? So, very simple things like that. Might it encourage you to think about a situation in the world differently? So if one puts it into the realm of thought rather than action, that might be easier for some people. And I think this is something, if I was rewriting that animation now, I think I might have just slipped that in. And it's something actually I'm saying to Simon, I need just to write that into the written guide sometime, because I think that would be helpful for some people. But it's not for everyone. And, I was talking to someone the other day, she's a school chaplain, and she said, those 4 questions don't work with our teenagers because they find it difficult quite to imagine themselves into the situation. But when I suggested the godly play type questions, I wonder what was going on. She said, oh yeah, they absolutely do those. And then I said, you could if you wanted, because you can mix and match these different approaches. So you could do the godly play questions. I wonder what Jesus was thinking. I wonder what it smelt like in the fields, all that sort of thing. You could then say to them, right, having done that, if this story happened today, what would it look like? And she could see that for teenagers, mixing and matching like that could work really well for them. So I think you do have to be, as you are describing, Judith, you have to be really very sensitive to the group. And, you may have to tweak an approach or not use it at all and abandon it like you did, which I think is great. The freedom to do that is brilliant. So, you have to just pray for wisdom. And I recognize finally, and I'll stop talking, the difficulty Christians have in taking part in these discussions. And really, my advice to Christians is try not to say anything and ask questions instead. There's a book, and I can't remember the exact title, but it's something like the 4 questions that Jesus answered and the 250 questions that Jesus asked. Now, those numbers are wrong, but the importance are right. All right. I mean, I think Jesus only actually answered about 7 questions, but he asked, 300. So what I would be saying to Christians, train yourselves to ask questions. And I find that when I'm talking to people, I'm not the most natural best coach because I want to spring in with brilliant ideas. And they always seem brilliant to me, but they never seem brilliant to anyone else. But I find that what I have to do is to keep praying, Lord, help me to keep quiet at this point. Help me to keep quiet. And so that might be the kind of prayer that some Christians in a group might want to pray.
And I think as well, Mike, I think there's an unlearning process, isn't there? That unlearning that we need to answer the question, as Judith said, what does this mean? And learn to trust that the Bible speaks directly as the Spirit illuminates the text in people's minds and hearts. That actually, that this Bible speaks for itself, and it's a very powerful thing once you see it and you start to trust the process, but it's quite hard to do that.
Yes, and that reminds me, one of the other approaches in that discovering is an approach where you just read through the passage and then you focus on a particular sentence or a particular phrase and really just ponder that and then share it with the wider group. So that's a much more reflective approach. I think, and then I think there's a fourth approach, which is a bit more like what you were doing earlier, Judith, which is a bit more, what can we do in the world, as it were, and what actions can we take in the world, which is, rather than my personal experimentation, it's what we can do together type things, I think. Just alerting you to those different approaches. And if you were doing a regular group of people who are exploring Jesus or whatever and going deeper, rotating the methods, I think would be great just for the variety.
Are there any other questions? I'm wondering, Mike, I'll just let people wave if they've got a question or something, or whether we can just put a slide up that shows where this fits in the Fresh Expressions journey, and perhaps if you could talk to that for a moment, because I think that might be helpful. Let me just so that, can you see that screen? Can you see that, Mike? Yes, up there.
Yeah, I've got it. That's great. Thanks. So what we found is that if you're working with people who don't come to church and you're really wanting to help them to begin to explore Jesus and so on, then a process that lots of people have found really helpful is you get just together with a friend, 2 or 3 of you, perhaps 4 or 5 if you want, but just 2 of you, and you get together and you just listen to the context and you listen to God. You're really asking yourselves, what could we offer to the people that we know that would be an act of love? that might be something as simple as providing an opportunity for them to come together. So I'm thinking of someone on a new housing estate. She got to know one or two of the people on the new housing estate, and they didn't go to church, but she did. And she said, well, what can we offer people on this housing estate? And so they took space in the community library, and they put a sort of questions box that people could put in questions into that box. And then people would gather in the community library, in a corner of the library, and they would discuss those questions and talk about them together, and then have a little bit of headspace at the end when they began to pray about their loved ones and situations in the world and so on. So that was just her act of love with a friend, was to provide an opportunity for people to meet together. But others might have a passion. One couple said to me, he likes cycling, so he's got together with his friends to go cycling. She said, I don't particularly enjoy cycling, so I'm getting together with some other people, and we're going to provide food when they return, and we'll all eat together. And you can see how, you might do that. If your passion was coaching youngsters, teenagers, for football or whatever, you might have a coaching session, and then your friend or several friends might provide some food, so that when the team is finished being coached, they can come and they can all eat together, begin to share their lives together. So you find a simple way of loving people. Maybe you're connected with a school and you'd love to do something for parents. You might just say, offer them, you say, oh, I enjoy watching films. So you could say, we're going to form a film club, and we'll have a film night every other week on a Friday, where we'll watch a film together. And then on the intervening week, we'll have a meal together and we'll discuss the film, and we'll do so from a spiritual or ethical angle. And if I was doing that again, I'd say, because we're discussing these films from a spiritual angle, let's just have a little bit of headspace at the end, just a time of quietness. If we believe in God, we can connect with God however we understand him, her, or it. But if we don't, just have positive thoughts for our next door neighbors. And people love often just lighting a candle, a little piece of silence, that oasis of quietness. People often love that. And the Spirit does all sorts of things in people's lives as that happens. So you find this act of love, which very often will be built around a particular passion of yours, a particular concern. Perhaps you're concerned about people who are homeless. What can we do with them? Or you share your own interests and so on. And then around this act of love, community forms. People start coming back regularly and they get to know each other. And there's a sense of, gosh, this is my community here, in a very light touch way. And in the context of that act of loving and building community, you then find ways to share Jesus. And you might use some of the ideas in the this sharing Jesus resource. So you might, for example, you might say, to go to a discovery, but well, you might say to people, would you be interested in exploring spirituality together? And if they said yes, you could say, well, one of the ways we could do this is Jesus is known as one of the world's greatest spiritual teachers. Let's look at some of the stories he told and see if we agree with them. And then you just pick out some of the parables that Jesus told from all four Gospels. And you could use those 4 questions that we've described, or some of the other approaches in the discovering section of the Share Jesus guide. But you might say, actually, that's too much for people. They're not ready for that. They find that a little bit intrusive. We could just do questions, conversations with a difference. Choose a theme. Anyone can choose a theme. But take it in turns. Only rule is the theme must be of interest to other people. Is it mental health? Is it celebrities? Is it a film we've seen, or television program, or something in the news? And you discuss that. And then after a while, what makes the conversation different is you just say, hey folks, now let's just imagine that God or a spiritual guru dropped in. What would they say about this topic? And then that lifts the topic into a different plane, as it were. It's quite fun. It's not the sort of thing people normally do, but it's an activity that they can take part in And what it does is to enable them to start connecting spirituality to everyday life in a way that they may never have thought was possible. And then having begun to share Jesus in all sorts of different ways, lots of different options, then as people walk a journey towards faith, they begin to become a little worshiping community. You can use the last resource, the enriching section of the Sharing Jesus website resource. You can use the enriching section to begin to introduce a bit of worship, and then you gradually connect people to the wider church, and you have an expression of church emerging there. And then at the very best, as people come to faith and are blessed by God, we pray that they'll repeat the process in their own lives with their own friends, and you can encourage them to do that. So that's just a little journey that we found works really well. Lots and lots of people are using it. I've just been in Florida, and quite a few people are using it over there. They're using it up and down the country here. I know they're using it in the Netherlands and elsewhere. And this is an approach to doing mission that fits with, or seems to fit with, the 21st century world in which we find ourselves.
Great, thank you. I did see a question come up in the chat. Okay. I think it does quite often. Try some more subtle ways to catch the ones that get away. Thanks, Linda, for that. I think just as Michael has gone around that circle, I think it is important to talk about the fact that this resource is in the context of community. This isn't like, why don't you create a Sharing Jesus activity that you invite people to, but actually it's offered as part of the journey from listening, loving and serving, and in an existing community, adding these spiritual conversations, Bible talk into that existing community. It's not sort of another resource to sort of say, start with this. It's something that you use within an existing community where relationships have already developed, and you add to it with this resource. Yeah. Any more questions or thoughts? Yeah, Tiz. Sorry, go on. Mike, and then I'll come back to Tiz.
Before we go to the next one, I wonder if is it Linda, if she could just amplify and elaborate a little bit what she's just typed into chat.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I haven't got a community other than church, very small. But what my husband and I do, we actually go on the streets and talk to people. And when I said about being blunt, I ask questions. That's how we start off. We break the ice. We ask the questions. But in view of the climate and what's been going on in the world, I don't feel that we've probably got a lot of time. And Jesus did tell us, he said, if you lift me up lift me up, I will draw all men. So that's what we do. We speak to people. I've just spoken to people, they're waiting for a bus, and I'll say hello and a little bit of chit chat, and then maybe say, do you know what's going to happen to you when you leave this planet? I'm very blunt. And we start the conversation, and usually, that's it. And it just leads into Jesus. If they know about Jesus, we sort of just clarify the gospel a bit more. And if they don't, we give them the gospel. And we've got material that we can give them to take away and think about with a contact number. But we haven't got facilities to do, say, like a group meeting, although we have had people home and we do a discipleship course with them, just sort of teach them the basics.
Well, Linda, I think it's great that you're able to share the gospel with people. I think that's wonderful. And the question I might just leave you with is, in addition to the contact number and so on that you give people, why don't you give them an invitation to come to your home for a Monday evening or whatever, to explore whatever questions they want to ask, and do it, light refreshments or whatever kind of refreshments you can do, and give them that invitation, and just see what happens. Just a thought. So there's a follow-up. That may not be practical for you, but just a question anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just thinking about the passage from John 5, which I was reading it the other day, when it's the healing at the pool, and Jesus says, I only do what I see the Father doing. And there's one person of all these people around the pool that are seeking to be healed. Jesus goes to this one person. And then when he heals this person, and the Pharisees come up to him because he's taking his mat on the Sabbath, they come up to him and say, who is this guy? You know, you said someone's healed you. Who is he? And Jesus didn't even tell this guy his name. You know, he just healed him. And it was interesting that later on he had a conversation with him. I think there is a sense in trusting that those future situations will be. We don't have to put everything across in the first conversation. I think that sometimes that sense of urgency can mean that we say things which aren't necessarily, people aren't ready for. They're not answering the questions that people are asking. And I think listening to the questions that people are asking is really important. And yeah, we're doing some street evangelism as well, Linda, over Easter. We've got a sofa in the market square here in March, and we're just having signs saying we will listen. And often we found when we've done this that, so it's quite public, it's quite in the streets, but as people sit there and they open up their hearts and they talk to you, and then they say, why are you listening? And that gives you the opportunity to talk about a God who loves us and is interested in our deepest needs. And I think that listening first, which is what this journey, the Fresh Expressions journey, is all about, listening first and demonstrating love and building relationship, that is a good foundation for those sort of the sharing Jesus bit. Yeah, Linda, go on.
Yeah, I found, especially more so now, people are more ready to talk because they're troubled. And it's much easier to introduce Jesus into the conversation, because I believe he's the answer to all our woes.
Yeah. Great. Did I see Catherine? Yeah. Simon, I think I saw Catherine. Yeah,
she's unmuted.
Hi, thank you. We've got a bereavement group, we've got a community coffee morning, we've got a recent mental health wellbeing group that's just started. I was wondering how, as a church leader, how do I get the folk who are running those things to find out about and engage with and this material? And do you have something that you can sort of use with your church to say to people, can you be thinking about where you might be using these sort of materials and resources?
So, Catherine, just remind me where Market Drayton is. Just remind me.
It's the middle of nowhere, but the middle of everywhere. It's it's in Shropshire. It's sort of halfway between Shrewsbury and Stoke-on-Trent.
Brilliant. So, there are various answers to that. One is there's a book that I wrote with a colleague in America called The 21st Century Christian. And it's a very short, accessible book. It's got some nice, pretty pictures in it. And you can read it. It's got lots and lots and lots of stories. You could read it. You don't need to read the whole thing, actually. You only need to read the first half. And that you might want to read the book yourself. And there might be some people in the congregation you want to, encourage to read. You could, if you were really, your congregation was up for this and you were up for this, there are preaching notes. There's a sermon series outline of 6 sermons. And if you wanted, Simon would send you that and you could sort of adapt the sermons and preach through it. Also, it gets better and better, I'm telling you. There are also 6 study notes. So if you've got 1 or 2 small groups in your church and you wanted people to discuss the book, you could give the book free or get them to buy the book. You could preach through it. You could then give them the study notes so they can discuss it. There's some 6 videos as well, Michael Beck and myself in conversation. So you could use any of those that are helpful. So you could, as it were, and I'm sort of increasingly saying this to some churches, as we come out of lockdown and we all take a deep breath and spend the summer recovering and regathering and rebuilding our energies, it might be that by the time we get to the autumn, or it might be early next year, we're saying to ourselves, well, actually, where do we go next? You know, we've come out of lockdown, our numbers are a little bit depleted. So what is God calling us to do next? You know, where are we going? And you might find that doing this was a really helpful thing, because at the end of it, you know, you have this sort of sermon series, you have the discussion group and so on. And then at the end, you might say to people, if you're interested, why don't you meet with me? And why don't we talk about what you could do in your context? And, you know, you're probably sitting there and saying, well, what on earth would I do with them? But if you were to talk to Simon, we could support you in that journey with the with anyone in your congregation. So you might just draw them into a small group, 2 or 3 of them, and you might encourage them. The first thing would be to go, what sort of things do you want to do? And they explore together. Go and find someone who can help you. They come back regularly and meet with you in this small group, and they get mutual support. So, you know, Simon could help with that. So I've said all that very quickly, but if you were to have a conversation with Simon, we could unpack that more slowly. Yeah. And, you know, if Simon wanted, you know, the 3 of us could chat together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think those groups that you've already got, I think the wonderful thing about the Fresh Expressions journey, or that listening first journey that Mike just went through, is that many churches have already got those types of outreaches where they've done the listening, they are loving and serving, and they have built community. It's how do you then bring that sharing Jesus into that? And I think that first video was really good, that says actually it could be after something, after the bereavement club. You know, if you want to stay, we're going to have this activity, and you know, the people who might lead that, if they use the Sharing Jesus resource to sort of prepare for how they might do that time after the bereavement club, or in the well-being space, having a separate space. So during the couple of hours of meeting to do whatever to look after our well-being, there is also this group that's going to talk about how we might look after our spiritual well-being, and you know, use the Sharing Jesus Bible talk resource or the spiritual conversation as a, you know, within a group setting within the wider well-being space. I think there is a number of ways that you can use it. I'm happy to talk more about that.
And Catherine, as you just think and pray about that, if you think of doing it, you might, as church leader, you might need to hold the hands of the lay people to begin with. So you might want to say to them, you know, might want to think of yourself almost as a chaplain to the group. So you know, if they want to start just, you know, this sort of 10 minutes of a little extra at the end of, say, the bereavement group, they might just, you know, you might just want to be there and help them introduce that and help them do it for the first few sessions, so that then they've got the confidence. And then you say, well, now you know what to do and it's working quite well. I don't need to come every week. Just encourage you to keep going on and tell me how you get on. And if you have any difficulties, I'm always here. You can, you know, have a word. So I think just holding their hands and helping them take the first thing. I mean, with a bereavement group, you could have something very gentle at the end. You could light a few candles. You could download some pictures from the internet, or buy some postcards, and you could just sort of cut the pictures up. There might be scenes of a factory, a scene of a city life, scene of countryside, and so on. You might just cut the picture up in a sort of jigsaw shape. So you cut it in half with zigzags, and then you might scatter the cards on a table, and then say to folks, just take half a card, find the other half that matches, you know, put it together as a jigsaw, and then share together, what does this picture, if anything, say to you? What's it saying to you? And that would just be the first start of a conversation. And then perhaps after a few weeks of doing that, or a few months even, you might just say, why would that picture, you know, spark a prayer in your thoughts? And do you want to have a quiet prayer together as we light the candle? That sort of thing. So there are lots of things you might do that can just help people, you know, add a little extra. It's really adding a little extra to the groups that are already meeting. I think it's great that you've got 2 or 3 groups. I'm very impressed. I've been going around the villages in Oxfordshire, mainly by Zoom, I have to say. And I'm impressed at so many community activities that they're involved with. And most of these, you could add something extra on the end.
Mike, I'm aware that Tiz asked a question, or waved to us to ask a question.
Yeah.
If you can come back to Tiz, if he can remember what he was going to ask us.
I love all of this idea. I mean, my background is youth work, and now I'm very much into intergenerational work. So what seems to me, though, is we're, as a church, I think somebody mentioned this earlier, we almost have to unlearn some things in order to ask questions. And listen to the answers that were given. I think I was around in a church in London when they were exploring, well, they called it St. Mark's, but it was St. Mark's Battersea Hill, and they wrote some of the alpha stuff. And you know, that idea, there's no wrong answer. We need to go back into that mindset, I think, within all of this stuff, so that just listening to their answers and then seeing ways that we can engage with those answers. But we've got to feel more confident that we can engage with questions and answer sessions. I think that's a wider point, but I can also see this working really well intergenerationally, because children are programmed to ask questions. Those in education, that's where they are, whereas it's us older ones who are not always so keen on doing new learning, are we? We kind of like, well, I've been doing it this way for years and it's all right. We maybe need to open ourselves up to having questions.
Tiz, I don't
know whether it's a question or a rant, so I'm going to stop.
No, Tiz, it's a great rant. I love it. Keep ranting. So what I think you're absolutely right. So many of these things can be done on an intergenerational basis. And I think it's not only being willing to ask questions, but when we're in a group and children ask questions, sometimes it's appropriate to give an answer, but sometimes it's better to encourage the children to come up with answers. And so some of the later material, the material on questioning and disagreeing, for example, in this Sharing Jesus website, is really relevant for that, because it's showing ways in which you can manage a situation where you don't know the answers. Or maybe you think you know the answer, but you're actually being like Jesus. You're not giving the answer. You're letting them work it out for themselves. And I think disciplining ourselves as Christians to be more like Jesus in our willingness to ask questions and let people work it out for themselves. Just give them the Bible stories. Let them come to their own conclusions. Trust the Holy Spirit. And I think we'll be amazed. And so often we get in the way. And I remember Rowan Williams once saying, leadership is seeing what other people, seeing sometimes what other people can see and helping them to see it. And then he went on to say, and the first thing you have to do is when you look at a landscape and you want someone else to see it, you have to get out of the way. And, we may just want to get out of the way of the story. Let the story speak to the person through the Spirit in their own way. So I think I'm just amplifying what you already said. Yeah. So that's been my rant.
Yeah. And I think there's an element there of the experimentation that you talk about in the Discovering unit, that, even if it's not a Sharing Jesus style Bible talk activity, at the end of a sermon, we need to do more of putting it into practice. My name's Simon, and there's that game Simon Says. If Simon says it, you do it. And there's Francis Chan, I think, talked about discipleship. We've changed Jesus Says into, we'll study it and we'll talk about it rather than actually do it. And I think sometimes just, putting into practice, experimenting with what we've read and what we're hearing is something that we don't do a lot of either. So I like that bit of the Bible talk myself. We're almost coming up to the full hour, which is great. I don't know if there's any last questions before we go. I can't see anybody waving. Can I just put the so Mike talked about this book, 21st Century Christian. I put a link in the put a link in the chat box, fxresourcing.org/shop. You can buy that and a couple of other books. There's also the Godsend app, which that circle, you can see that on the screen there, the Listen, Love, Community, Share Jesus circle. There's a bit more digging into that there, and that's also that the content to the app is now also available in a book as well, available from the shop, but also directly from Amazon. I think that may be the end of that presentation. So yeah, hopefully that's been useful for you. And any last words, Mike?
No, I just really encourage you to look at the resource, and I'd encourage you just to think, could I get together with a friend and find a simple way to love the people around me? What would that look like? You know, what would it do if we just said, you know, every month we'll throw a little drinks party for the neighborhood, and we'll have it as a party where we can actually, you know, take it in turns to bring a topic for discussion, and it's a discussion party. Maybe it's a party, maybe it's just drinks, but it's drinks and discussion. And two people come, wouldn't that be brilliant? You know, and you might just start a little discussion group just with a friend. So if that whets your appetite a little bit, do look at that 21st century Christian book. Just read the first half, and just look at the stories there and see if they inspire you to do more.
I'm going to pray in a moment just as we close, but I just want to say that we're going to be running these quite regularly. I think we've got some other lunchtime workshops scheduled. I think we've got a few evenings scheduled as well. And so Catherine and others who might have people you think, oh, they might want to come and be part of this, do invite others along. Or if you put this into practice in the next few months and want to come back and share your experiences with us, then that would be great, and we can talk about that. So let me pray for each of you as we go. Father, we thank you. We thank you for your son, Jesus, and the good news that he means and brings into our lives and into the world as a whole. And how that the world needs that good news at the moment. So Lord, we pray for each of us as we seek to share what we have and who we have in Jesus with others. We pray that you would continue to inspire us as we use this resource and in other ways seek to introduce people to you. We pray that in so doing we would glorify your name and see your kingdom come. And in that name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Bless you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Really do appreciate you giving us your time. And yeah, I put my email in there, info@fxresourcing.org. So if anyone does want to get in touch with me, feel free to do that. Take care.
Fantastic.
Bye.
Thank you for coming, everyone. Bye.